For the Lord is a righteous God, perfect in all of his ways. For the Lord is a righteous God, perfect and worthy of praise. Blessed are all the pure in heart, one day they shall see God. Blessed are all the pure in heart, precious in his sight they are. And the righteous will see his holy face, washed in the blood, saved by his grace. To the righteous he promises this special place, right next to his heart, face to face.
For the Lord is a righteous God, perfect in all of his ways.
For the Lord is a righteous God, perfect and worthy of praise. For the
Righteous will see
is a
his
righteous God, perfect in all of his ways.
by his grace.
For the
Righteous he
Lord is a
promises
righteous God,
right next to his heart, face to
praise. And the righteous will see his holy face, washed in the blood, saved by his grace. To the righteous he promises this special place, right next to his heart, face to face. Right next to his heart, face to face. Right next to his heart, face to face. Lay your burden down, every care you carry, and come to the table of grace, for there is mercy. Come just as you are, we are all unworthy to enter the presence of God, for he is holy. Lift up your heart, lift up your hands, fall on your knees and pray, for the King of Kings and the love he brings is here in this place. We raise our voices, raise our song, we offer him our praise, for the King of Kings and the joy he brings is here, he is here in this place. Lay your burden down, every care you carry, and come to the table of grace, for there is mercy. Come just as you are, we are all unworthy to enter the presence of God, for he is holy. Lift up your heart, lift up your hands, fall on your knees and pray, for the King of Kings and the love he brings is here in this place. We raise our voices, raise our song, we offer him our praise, for the King of Kings and
All right, folks, this is our last lesson on the spiritual disciplines. For now, at least, we might do another class sometime and keep going, but for our current iteration, we're going to finish up spiritual disciplines today. And we're going to talk about one of my favorites. I probably said that about all of them. They're all my favorite, but I really have been influenced a lot by the discipline of simplicity. I'm calling it the liberating discipline because it does so much to free us from the fatigue of complexity in life, from busyness and distraction. It really sets the stage for a lot of the other disciplines to be possible. By way of just discussing terminology, some will call this minimalism. Some will say simplicity and minimalism are different things. Some will say they're the same. Some will say one is good, one is bad. I'm not real picky about the terminology. I'm going with simplicity because it probably makes more sense in a Christian discussion to call it simplicity. Minimalism is maybe more associated with a fad of downsizing your home or using IKEA furniture or something. I don't know. Minimalism might be a style, whereas simplicity is more a way of life. Maybe that's the distinction. I don't put a lot of stock in it. Okay, so to talk about why this matters as a Christian discipline, think about this common situation. Imagine a blue-collar family being pulled in all directions. They got 3 kids. They live in a home that they feel like is a little bit cramped. Some of their friends that have the same number of kids have a little bigger home and can do more stuff. But to have a little bigger home, they'd either have to change jobs or work more hours at their jobs. That means less time for family, except maybe on the weekends. But we got church on the weekends and we're trying to be involved there. So maybe we need to dial back our involvement at church to make more time for recreation so that we can have, it kind of spirals, doesn't it? Where you start out trying to make a decision, what's best for your family in terms of your physical house and possessions, and you end up with a cascading set of choices about how your life is going to work. How do you balance work life, family life, recreation, and still find time, we hope, for religion and connection to God? Does a comfortable middle-class life today have room for religion? Or have we created something that just religion's not compatible with? Other questions, how do we best provide for our family? As a provider, I think about what does my family need, and am I bringing in enough income to justify the work I'm doing and the expenses that we have? Does that make sense? Am I being a good provider? How do I balance time spent with family with the time required to provide for the family? We all have this kind of stereotype image of a guy who works all the time to make money and never sees his kids. Well, there's a reason that guy exists, because it costs money to take care of your kids. And we're all trying to kind of balance that. And who decides the quality of life my family needs? Who gets to make that choice? If you take all of those very common family questions and bundle them together, what we find out is that all of them are based on a common set of assumptions of a story that we're living out as a family. And if you poke at that story a little bit and start thinking about the assumptions in it, it does start to crumble a little bit. Living comfortably and adequately. If you ask most families, what do you want out of life? Well, we just want a comfortable life. We're not looking for a mansion or, a really extravagant lifestyle. We just want to live comfortably or adequately. But nobody has a clear definition of what that is. For most people, it's a little better than they've got. But it's not like anyone can tell you, here's how much you should have and here's how big your house should be. This is the definition of happiness, right? It's not clear. It's being set by what the people around us and by what we're being told through ad agencies and marketing that tell us this is what you should have and how you should live. All of these assumptions are product of a narrative, a storyline that we're living out and probably haven't really even thought about whether it's true or not. That you become an adult, you have a family that looks like this, and you provide these things, and you look around and kind of measure yourself based on the story as you see it. It's the pair of glasses that you have on, and you don't even know you're wearing them, but those are the lenses through which you see everything in your life. This is what I need. This is what I want. This is what we should have. The catch is that a lot of us don't really take time to think what story am I living out, and who's telling the story, and who's setting the terms of my life? One of my favorite crotchety old theologians is Stanley Hauerwas, who says modernity is the attempt to produce a people who believe that they should have no story except the story that they choose when they had no story. That's completely opaque. I mean, what does that mean? Well, what he's trying to say is we all think, yeah, well, I'm not living based on anybody else's assumptions. I'm doing my own thing. I'm just doing what makes me happy. Really? Okay. Well, what is it that makes you happy? You end up looking around at everybody else and trying to decide what makes sense to you. And much as you say, no, not me, I've got my own thing, I do my own life, you really don't. We have a narrative, a bill of good that's being sold to us, sometimes quite literally, so that we can know whether or not we've been successful in life or not. So my conclusion then is, if that's where our problems come from as a family, we need a better storyteller. We need someone to give us a better set of assumptions than our nation, our culture, and definitely better than our economy to tell us what we need to live a good life. And I think that storyteller is the church. I think the story comes from Jesus himself, but the storyteller is the church, which then is kind of funny when you think about it, that a lot of times the narrative of I've got to have more and I've got to do these other things squeezes church out, when church was exactly the force that could redefine and reorient our lives towards simplicity and away from the busyness of the hustle and bustle culture. The church can teach a person to be happy without prosperity, but prosperity cannot teach a person to be happy without the church. That tells me the church is going to be indispensable. Okay, so what are my options then? If I'm picking a story to live by, what can I choose between? In short, there's basically two general ways that we can live our life. One is a story about consumption, and the other is a story about simplicity. And you can guess, the right one we're aiming at is the spiritual discipline of simplicity. But let's start by talking about consumption and consuming and how that drives a lot of the choices that we make in our life. The consumption narrative is that consuming and or owning more will increase our happiness. And that is something we are told every single day. It's what keeps ad agencies in business. All right, so let me give you two ads. First, I'm going to show you a car ad. It's really short. But just ask yourself, what story is this ad telling?
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here. You can take a break. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Hey, go. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down.
That one's pretty obvious, right? They gave you the lyrics from Pharrell. If you buy this car with these features, it will make you happy. Your family will be happy. People around you will be happy. This is where happiness comes from. It's from having this vehicle. Now, I'll give you a different one. Same point, though. How much data does your family need on their wireless plan to be happy?
Oh, we're here to save the day. We are gone on our way. Light it up and let us go to the stars and to the moon. Start it up, we'll be there soon. Turn it all around, flip that frown.
Entertainment when you need it most. Streamed instantly on our ultra-fast 4G network. Vodafone. Power to you.
Okay. You know, before data plans, children couldn't be happy. And because children weren't happy, no one on the bus was happy. But now that you could have this data plan, everyone can be happy. It's so great that we can now buy things that make us happy. Right? That's the story that you're being told in those ads. And don't get me wrong, I like new cars and I like data. But you just need to know that's the story we're being fed. A couple of economists and theologians have commented on this little process that we get involved in. Glasser says, one does not sell a product, one sells a dream. And those two ads are good examples of that. They barely talk about the product. They just show you the dream of happiness when people have that product. Ryder says, the will to consume and the desire that drives it cannot be taken for granted, and this is what keeps advertising agencies in business. Advertising thus directs us not towards materialism, but towards ultimate things. We are promised that buying things results in happiness and fulfillment. And it really does have some deep meaning in these ads. And I'm not knocking ad agencies, they've got a job to do, but we should at least notice what they're trying to do. So to summarize then, what's the goal, or what's the life we're being sold? What's the life we're being told to live? The goal is happiness, which is a funny word when you think about it. Happiness comes from the same root as happen or happenstance. It has to do with circumstances. It has to do with things that exist in your life, as opposed to, say, contentment, which is independent of those. But yeah, okay, the goal is happiness. And how do we get there? By having just a little bit more. The newest model this, the newest model that, one more of these, one more of those. But never does anyone stop to question, can economic progress ever actually attain that goal? Am I ever actually going to have enough where we plateau and say, here I am, perfectly fulfilled and happy with the amount I have? We know it's not actually how it works. The problem with that story is that it's always pushing us towards more, to having one more thing, and never being satisfied with what we have. If you were satisfied, you wouldn't buy the next thing. And so that storyline can't allow you to be satisfied. It has to tell you you need more, and you need to work harder to make more to be, happy. And your life gets really complicated as you keep adding ornaments on the tree, as it were, until it topples over. Let me give you an example just in new home size. This is one of my favorite charts. I know, weird to have a favorite chart, but I love this one. Look at average new house size over the last 60, 70 years. 1950, average new home construction, 983 square feet. 1970, 1,500 square feet. 1990, 2,080 square feet. 2010, 2,169 square feet. And there's not even a plateau inside. I mean, it may be slowing the rate of increase, but it's still increasing. And yet in that time, technology has gotten smaller. So it's not like we have bigger things we need to fit into our house. Everything is actually getting smaller in terms of devices and objects in our home. And neither is the family getting bigger. The average family size in those years is decreasing fairly rapidly, from big families to small families. So why is it that the big family was somehow able to live in 983 square feet or less, and the small family finds the need for 2,100 or more? That's the narrative. Right? We're being told you're not happy until you have this. And it just never reaches a cap. It never plateaus and actually makes you happy. And so what Christianity is going to do then is push back on that and say, hang on a second, there's a different way of life, and in it is some simplicity, some contentment that will keep you out of the rat race and point you towards a life of satisfaction in God. Joshua Becker, over at the Becoming Minimalist blog, whom I really like, says, we have confused needs with wants and security with luxury. As a result, many of us pursue and collect large stockpiles of possessions in the name of security or happiness. We work long hours to purchase them. We build bigger houses to store them, and we spend more energy maintaining them. The burden of accumulating and maintaining slowly becomes the main focus of our lives. So why don't you have time for the spiritual disciplines of prayer and Bible reading and on and on? Well, because I'm busy. And why are you busy? It's this false narrative that I've got to have more and I've got to work this hard to have that much or I'm not going to be happy. Well, Christianity says, what if that's just not true? Maybe you can be happy with a lot less. Maybe you can be content. Maybe that's better than happiness. What if there's an alternative? Simplicity instead of consumption. Ryder writes, unlike mainline theologians and economists, the Jesus of the Gospels appears to be aware that desire can be shaped by the production of wealth at the deepest levels, and that this can interfere with our deepest convictions and ultimate values. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The problem of economics is therefore a genuinely theological problem. That it really is, it's not that there's two lives. There's my spiritual life and then there's my work. Your work and how you view what you have, how much you make, where you live, all of those questions influence the spiritual questions, and the spiritual overlap on those as well. There is no distinction between them. We're going to have to stop saying, well, my business life is off limits from my religion. My home life is off limits from my religion. If it's religion, it's got to be everywhere, or else it's nothing more than a sham. And Jesus definitely acknowledges that. So what I would say then is that we have an alternative narrative, which is a life of simplicity and contentment. What are the elements of this other narrative that Christ tells us? There are some common features, but talk about one or two of them, but living a life that's out of control. The economic narrative is about having control. I'll make enough to own enough, to be safe enough and provide enough, and I'll be enough. I'll be in control. And the Christian life says, I'm not actually in control, and that's okay. I'll say more about that in a minute. With out of control comes dependence, that I'm not in charge of my own economic destiny or my contentment or happiness, that actually that comes from God. Things I have are gifts rather than earnings. The economic model says work hard, get paid. The Christian says everything I have is a gift of God. And so I view it differently on whether I should keep it or give it. And then contentment versus happiness. Happiness seems to think that if I had the right circumstances, I could then enjoy my life. Contentment tells me that it's not dependent on what's going on around me, whether I am having a good life. Howard Wass again says, Christian social ethics can be only done from the perspective of those who do not seek to control national or world history, but who are content to live out of control. To do ethics from the perspective of those out of control means Christian must find the means to make clear that the cross determines the meaning of history. For to be out of control means Christians can risk trusting in gifts. If the cross is what it's all about, and that's the storyteller for us, then I can trust in something other than how much I achieve and acquire. The premier example of that was what I discussed in the sermon included last week. So if you want to go back to the last midweek service, I talked about simple living from Matthew chapter 6, and that's where Jesus makes this very case. You can't serve two masters, he says in chapter 6, verse 24, and the example he gives is God and money, right? That there's two stories going on here, two options. You're either going to serve God in his story, or you're going to serve money in that story, but you can't do both. It's not possible. And you can't do them both at the same time, which is what every American Christian is trying to do. Instead, he says there's more to life than what you eat, what you wear, how you live, and those things. Instead, he gives other examples. Birds are fed, in verse 26, even though they never plant any crops. They receive gifts rather than earn things. Nothing lives forever, and no worrying about your health and taking all the precautions changes that. Flowers are beautiful, even though they never get dressed. That's verses 28 through 30. That all the things we're consumed with, we see examples in nature where God provides for those who take no worry about the anxiety we have over controlling our own destiny and providing more for our family and owning more things. The Father knows, the Father provides, and so we can seek first the kingdom of God and worry less. That's the short version of last week's sermon. Go back and view that if you want the details, because that's the biblical underpinning for what we're discussing today. Not a lot of Bible in today's lesson. It's mostly based on last week's now what? What's the application? Okay, so what's the application? First of all, I want to point out that this isn't me giving you a new law to follow. Now I've learned the alternative to economic wastefulness, and I've got to go and sell everything I have immediately. That's not the new law I'm giving you. I like Richard Foster's discussion, and if I'm going to recommend one book this week, it's The Freedom of Simplicity by Richard Foster, which really influenced me. He says, we live centered in trust and faith, and all our action and work arises out of that center. It is not fear and anxiety over tomorrow that prompt us to work, but obedience to the divine command. We make provision as it seems right and good, just as the birds do. But what comes to us is not so much the result of our labor as it is the gracious gift of God. We live the carefree life of unconcern for possessions in the midst of our work. Please remember, and this is speaking of the early church in the book of Acts, where they sold all their possessions and gave to those in need. Please remember, we have no indication that what occurred in the early days of the church was commanded, or that it was even the right thing to do. That is to say, there's no verse where the apostles say, now you must sell everything you have. Quite the contrary, if you read Acts chapter 5, for example, Peter tells Ananias and Sapphira, the money was yours while you had it. Nobody made you sell it. Nobody made you give it after you sold it. He says this is not some pattern to be slavishly imitated. What we do see is an incredible freedom to experiment with practical ways to flesh out the meaning of love for God and neighbor. Under the authority of Christ, these spirit-filled Christians were freed to try new ways to love each other. The caring we see in Acts gives us significant clues as to which direction the winds of the Spirit desire to blow in our day. What I'm trying to express is that these people were being taken over by the life of the Spirit and transformed, which transformed them at every point. What's he saying? They got on board with a new storyline, and then they figured out how to live that story that the Spirit was telling. The gospel story was different than the way they were living, and so they start living differently. And the apostles didn't have to say, you have to sell everything, here's the new rules. They just told the new story, and people said, maybe I don't need that stuff anymore. And that's what we need to be doing in the discipline of simplicity. Not a judgmental, absolute set of rules, but rather a freedom to experiment with a different way of life than what we're being taught by our culture. So, by way of application, do not assume a one-size-fits-all version of this, that everybody ought to have the same house I do and the same number of possessions. We're all going to pick and choose. I like to have the newest phone because it helps me do my work. There are other things I can do without. I don't have as many hobbies as some people do. You just kind of make choices about what's going to be useful to you, what size of house you need. Feel free to experiment and say, I'm going to try doing without that. I'm going to try to give this away and live differently. Feel free to reverse course. I experimented and it didn't go well. I want to try something else. Just have some openness to that. Okay, so this is supposed to be a practical class on spiritual disciplines, and so far I've been giving you flighty philosophical thoughts. Let's get to some action steps. How do I actually bring simplicity into my life? Let me give you some concrete steps, the best I can. Number one, honesty. Take a look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the following things. No amount of possession will ever make the family safe. I can never have enough to be secure. It doesn't exist. I can't ever have a good enough job to be content. That's not possible. No larger house will ever be large enough. If you're waiting to be happy when you get to that next level of the economic strata, you're not going to be happy there either. No eschatological economic state awaits after the next promotion. When I get that job, then everything will be perfect. It never happens. Our possessions all must be evaluated afresh through the lens of the gospel, not through the storytelling of our culture. That's what simplicity is about. And when we do that, we're going to find some role models. This is step number 2. Find some people who have actually experimented with this and take a look at their lives. You're going to need to do that. For me, it was blogger Joshua Becker, author Richard Foster, and the Benedictine monks at our Abbey of Clear Creek Monastery. And I got to see them and say, they actually do live a good life, and they don't live the same kind of goals and dreams that I had at the time. And that helped me. For you, it might be a grandparent or a neighbor or somebody at your church that you look at and say, this person is not in the rat race, and yet their life is great from a spiritual point of view. Find you some role models and start looking at the features that make them who they are as admirable people. And I think you'll find this simplicity of life comes up in that. Next step is to start giving. I don't think the path to owning less is the trash can all the time. It might be the trash can, but quite often it's through giving. C.S. Lewis has this great line, a mysterious quote, nothing you have not given away will ever truly be yours. Right? What does that mean? Our possessions possess us, because while we have them, we're at risk of losing them, and we have to live our life keeping them. When we give them away, we are taking possession of them and doing something with them, rather than just keeping them. And there's great power in that. So if you want to live a simpler life, you want to downsize the possessions of your life, I'd suggest start by giving away anything you haven't used in a year. Okay, if you want a real practical suggestion, look around the house, look around the shed, look around the shop. If you haven't used it in a year, do you need it? What is it granting to your life? In what way is it drawing you closer to God or your family or anything else? If you haven't used it in a year, what purpose does it serve in your life other than being one more obstacle to simplicity? In that way, your inner consumer is going to fight against this. It's going to tell you you're being wasteful, you need to be frugal, you can't give things away like that. Hey, remember, giving is never wasteful. Giving is never wasteful. Say it again. Giving is never wasteful. Right? It is its own good. So if you're concerned about, I hate to waste this, well then find a use for it. And if you can't find anyone who can use it, then it is actually trash. Right? It is an object that has no value to anyone, including you, except to be maintained. That's not simplicity of life. That's just one more complexity. Set some obvious targets for simplifying your life. Start in your storage closet or your storage shed. If you rent a storage facility for extra things to have that you never see, ask yourself, why do I have that? I mean, you're working to make money to pay for a storage shed to put things in that you don't use. That's the opposite of the simplicity of life that we're striving for as Christians, of just having what we need and no more. Being more like birds, butterflies, and flowers than hoarders, right? So start in your storage shed. If you have to pay for storage, if you have extra storage because it won't fit in your house, do I need all that? Does it serve a function? Anything that's still in a box. And if you've moved a couple times like I have through the years, and some things never got unpacked, apparently I didn't need it. And yet I'm moving it from place to place as if I'm going to use it. If it's still in a box, you probably don't need it. Anything that's in the way in your life. If you're having to spend a lot of time maintaining something, or it's literally in the way, you have to move it from place to place to get it out of your way so you can live the life you want, why is it there? Get rid of it. Give it away. And then you start to set small goals. When Celine and I started down this road several years back, we started out with a room. We were a family that had one more room than we really thought we should need. And we thought, could we do without that room? Could we ultimately clear out one entire room of our house and just have it empty, just to prove that we could? And we did. It was kind of awesome. Well, what else could we do without? And we started looking in the garage, and we thought, we have a 2-car garage at the time, and both of our cars are parked outside because of all of our stuff in the garage, which sadly has become the case again, and I've got to get back to it. But you ask yourself, why does that happen? What things do we actually need from day to day to live our lives? And why do we feel the need to buy and maintain all the other things? Is that the life of simplicity that you see in Jesus, who just kind of goes from town to town, living his life and maintaining a very simple footprint in the world? Challenges as they come to you. There'll be events in life that'll say, aha, now see, here is proof that you need more stuff and you need to make more money, and this other stuff has to go on the back burner. Celine and I had just kind of gone through a lot of this, and then lo and behold, she was pregnant with Calvin. And we thought, oh, well, that's a problem. We got to have more stuff for the baby, right? I mean, you got to have certain things to have a baby. And then we started thinking about it. Is that even true? Is that even true? That we have to have an extra room for a baby? That we have to have more space? How many families have lived with less and their kids come out okay? Who is telling us that I've got to have a bigger house to have one more kid? And that was a challenge that we faced head on. We actually downsized from a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house we were in Jinx to a 2-bedroom house, actually an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment. At the same time we were having a baby. And it was fine. Like we didn't burst into flames and our kids weren't deprived, and it worked out okay. Professional expectations or personal expectations, family expectations. Well, you got to have room to entertain. Really? You're going to work this hard to have one more room in your house for the purpose of occasionally using it? Maybe you want to do that. I'm not telling you the rules. I'm just saying it's something you challenge and you say, do I really have to have that? Do I need that extra space? Do I need that extra thing in order to live my life appropriately? And then finally, I would suggest to you that you prepare yourself for reactions. When you start doing this, you're going to get some funny looks. If you try to simplify your life, so embedded into us is the other narrative of having more and consuming more, that when you start doing something opposite, people really get worried about you. When we first downsized where we were living, and we've done this a couple of times, and to be fair, we've gone back and forth. Right now, we're living in a little bigger space than we were before. We have more things than we did before, and we've gone back and forth depending on what we thought was appropriate at that moment in our life. But the first time we downsized houses from that house in Jinx to the apartment, friends and church members were immediately worried about us. Are you having financial troubles? Are you having marital problems? And we had to explain, no, we're fine. We're making a decision. We just don't want to live like that anymore. We don't want to spend that much on housing. We want to spend it on other things. We want to be able to do more good in our lives, and that means having a smaller place to live, and we're going to be happy with that. Are you sure? Other people assumed, oh, you're downsizing so you can save money to build your mansion later. You're going to go build a home. I kept saying, no, actually, we have no plans. We're going to live in this apartment for a while. You're not saving for something? No, I'm just doing this. Others felt implicitly judged. What are you saying about me, that I have too big a house? We're not saying anything about you. We're just doing our thing. It's funny. It became very clear to me that I was on the right track when people responded and reacted that strongly by a choice I was making. It made me think, wow, there really is some narrative going on in the world telling me I have to live a certain way. And everyone's bought into it, that if I do something different, people are genuinely confused. So for this week, if you want to live out the discipline of simplicity of life, owning less, having less, trying to get on board with a more dependent on God kind of life, and a less clutter-filled, economically driven life, here are some assignments for you to think. Look around and ask, how can you make your life simpler? What's getting in the way of what needs to matter in your life? How could you demonstrate greater dependence on God instead of trying to make sure you have everything you need all the time? What can you live without? What can you give away? Those are the real challenges. And I think if you'll take a look at those questions, try this week, if you want a simple place to start, try to give something away that you really don't need. And see if your life implodes. Turns out it won't. But there is a simpler life Christians can live. And when you simplify life in that way, you find time magically appears for all the other disciplines we've talked about through this class. Hope it's been beneficial to you. Hope that does some good for you. If you'd like to talk about it more, I'd be happy to talk to you.
The minimalist lifestyle is a movement that seeks to pare down possessions to only the essential. Because life can be lived richer and fuller when unnecessary possessions have been removed, it is a growing trend that includes more than just young, single 20-somethings. Many families are embracing the lifestyle as well, and more are being introduced to it every single day. Maybe even this is your first introduction. Now, some people get nervous when they hear the word minimalist. For them, it conjures up images of destitution or barren walls or empty cupboards. And rightly so, they decide that this is no way to enjoy life. And I would agree, that is no way to enjoy life. Since deciding to become minimalist years ago, we have been on a journey to define what that means for us and how it fits into our unique lifestyle. We live in the suburbs of Phoenix. We have 2 kids. We're active in our community and in our church. We like to entertain and show hospitality and host small groups. Our life is not identical to anybody else. It is our life, nobody else's. And so minimalism for us would have to be unique. It would require us to determine what our most important pursuits are, and then remove everything that distracts us from it. To determine if minimalism might indeed be the right lifestyle for you, consider these questions. Number 1, do you spend too much time cleaning? If you enjoy clean, tidy homes, but don't like to do cleaning, minimalism might be the answer, because the easiest way to reduce cleaning is to own less stuff. Number 2, are you trying to get out of debt? Debt holds our life in bondage and it weighs heavily on our shoulders. And getting a handle on it by buying less is one of the most life-giving actions you can take. Number 3, is there too much stress in your life? Physical clutter results in extra anxiety on our lives. Minimalism removes the clutter and limits the distraction that it causes. It's like a breath of fresh air for our lives. Number 4, would you like more time in your day? Consider for just a moment the amount of time that our belongings drain from our life. Whether we're cleaning or organizing or managing or maintaining or shopping, possessions demand a large percentage of our time. Number 5, are you environmentally conscious? Minimalism reduces the impact on the environment by requiring less resources on the front end and resulting in less waste on the back end. Number 6, are you frugal? While becoming a minimalist doesn't mean necessarily that you have to spend less money, it certainly provides the opportunity to do so. And because you're buying less things, you also have the option to make higher quality purchases that last longer. Number 7, do you enjoy financially supporting other causes? Minimalism provides an opportunity to not just save money for the sake of keeping it, but for using it to further causes that you believe in. After all, once you become content with your belongings, you are freed up to begin meeting the needs of others. Number 8, are there things you value more than material possessions? Minimalism seeks to intentionally promote the things in life we most value by removing anything that distracts us from it. It allows our life to center around our deepest heart desires rather than the items on sale at a department store. Number 9, are you not afraid of change? Minimalism is a counter-cultural lifestyle that will force changes in the way you spend your time, energy, and money. Of course, not every change is for the better, but minimalism definitely is. Number 10, is your life too valuable to live like everyone else? Our heart, soul, and passions make us valuable and unique. Don't sacrifice your important role in this world by settling for the same possessions that everybody else in your neighborhood is chasing. Your life is far too important. Your particular practice of minimalism is going to look different from anybody else. After all, you live a different life than anybody else. So find a style that works for you, one that's not cumbersome or burdensome, but it's freeing based on your values, desires, passions, and rational thinking. Ultimately, you will begin to remove the unneeded things in your life. As a result, you will find space to intentionally promote the things you most value by removing anything that distracts you from it.